Out of the way. She's just a loader. The jeers cracked sharp across the carrier deck, dismissing her as nothing in the storm of jet wash and steel. Then chaos struck. A massive ammo drum ripped free from its rack, thundering across the slick steel, barreling straight toward a young sailor. No one moved. She did, diving low, sliding hard, boots sparking on wet metal. Her hands slammed the chock into place. The drum shuddered to a halt. In the same breath, she ripped the sailor clear, saving him by inches. Silence. Not for the rescue, but for the flash of bronze and black from her sleeve. A medal from a mission buried, erased, declared impossible. The Admiral's voice cut through the shock. "Where did you get that?" This is Veteran Biker. Comment 1 if you're new, 2 if you've been with us, 3 if you ride with us every week. Like, subscribe, and stay to the end. The carrier deck roared with the constant churn of engines, machinery, and shouted commands, but Lena Ward blended into the noise like she always did, hands gripping the cart loaded with 20mm rounds as she pushed along the yellow-marked path toward the waiting FA-18. She was just another munitions loader, anonymous in her blue deck shirt, cranial helmet, and earmuffs, moving with the steady rhythm of someone who knew exactly how to stay unnoticed. She had done it for months, kept her head down, spoken little, worked hard. The less attention she drew, the easier it was to forget that her life hadn't always been this simple. Then the gust hit, whipping across the deck with a force that made even the jets rock slightly on their tie-downs. The wind caught her left sleeve, pulling the cuff back just enough to reveal the bronze and black circle stitched inside. A young ordnance tech named Westin saw it. He didn't just glance. His eyes locked on the medal's distinct shape, the reversed eagle design, the black outer ring. His mind made the connection instantly. It wasn't a regular award. It was the kind of citation people whispered about in secure rooms. One, tied to a mission that had been erased from every official record. No one on this ship was supposed to have it. According to the history Westin had heard in half-told rumors, no one had survived the mission it came from. He lifted his mic, hesitated, then spoke. "Ops, Westin on deck. I've got something you'll want to hear. Possible Medal of Valor, variant model, on a female loader." In the island's control room, Admiral Marcus Hale listened without much interest until Westin added bronze center, black ring, reversed eagle, 7th Strike Group issue. Hale's hand stilled on the paper he'd been reviewing. That variant wasn't public knowledge. He'd seen it only once, years ago, when he'd been a captain signing off on an operation so classified it didn't officially exist. The people involved had been declared Kia. There had been no survivors. If what Westin said was true, then one of those ghosts was on his deck. Hale stood, told his XO to hold the brief, and left. His pace was deliberate, but fast as he crossed the ship and stepped out into the wind and noise. He spotted her near the forward catapult, pushing the cart toward the Hornet. The crowd shifted subtly around her, parting just enough for him to close the distance. "Ma'am," he said, voice cutting through the deck's chaos, "hold your position." She stopped, hands resting on the cart's handles, eyes calm but unreadable. "Roll your sleeve up," he ordered. "Sir, I have a delivery to make," she replied evenly. "And I have an order to give. Sleeve, now." The deck's activity continued, but attention was drawn in their direction. Lena's jaw set. She looked toward the Hornet, then back at him, released the cart's brake, and touched her cuff before stopping. "With respect, Admiral, that's personal property. I know exactly what it is." She pulled the sleeve down over it. then you know it doesn't concern the chain of command. "Come with me," he said. She followed him below deck, leaving the cart behind. The compartment he led her into was small, a table bolted to the deck in the center. He pulled something from his pocket, a small velvet box, opened it, revealing the same medal mounted on a plaque. "Tell me where you got it. You already know. I want to hear it from you. That's not going to happen." He studied her. "The last time I saw one of these, it was given to a widow at a closed casket funeral. Every recipient was Kia. Every reported recipient," she said quietly, his eyes narrowed. "You're saying you survived that op? I'm saying nothing. If that's true, you're carrying a secret that could rip open more than one sealed file in DC. Then maybe it's better if we leave it sealed." He tapped the medal. "I can't do that without knowing exactly who I've got on my deck. If you think I'm a danger, lock me up. Otherwise, let me get back to work." He closed the box, slid it back into his pocket. "Fine. But if something happens out here, anything, you'll get one chance to prove whether you deserve that medal. Don't waste it." Back on deck, she resumed pushing the cart. The stares of nearby sailors heavier than the ammunition she carried. Weston's gaze followed her, curiosity burning. Up on the platform, Hale watched her cross the deck, the wind snapping at his cap. The medal was real, the past was real, and now the clock was ticking toward the moment when both of them would have to act. The day moved on, but the tension from that brief confrontation didn't leave the deck. Hale returned to the island, eyes on the operations board, but his mind stayed on Lena Ward. He'd seen skilled operators hide in plain sight before, but never on his own ship, never wearing a medal that tied directly to one of the darkest files in his career. He didn't believe in coincidence, not when lives and equipment worth billions were on the line. Down on the deck, Lena kept to her routine, running loads from the weapons elevator to the aircraft lined for the afternoon sortie. She didn't hurry, didn't slow, didn't acknowledge the sideways glances. To anyone else, she looked like the model of focus, but her thoughts were locked on Hale. His voice, his eyes when he said she'd have one chance to prove she deserved that medal. She didn't want that chance to come. That kind of chance meant something had gone very wrong. It came faster than anyone expected. Mid-afternoon, the wind shifted harder across the bow, the weather front. That had been tracking parallel to the carrier suddenly changing course. Pilots already in the air were radioing for adjustments to recovery. Windows and the deck crew scrambled to prepare for a faster cycle. Lena was halfway through moving a fresh load of ammunition when the first alarm sounded, short, sharp, urgent. Flight control called down, inbound supply helo reporting mechanical issues. Unable to stabilize on approach, carrying ordnance in an unsecured rack. Hale was on the deck within minutes, scanning the landing zone as the Seahawk descended. Unevenly, one skid lower than the other, tail rotor straining to keep alignment. The bird touched down harder than it should have, the unsecured rack inside shifting violently. The clatter of steel was followed by the deep, unmistakable thud of a container tipping over. Crew chief's voice came over comms, strained. "We've got a live ammo drum loose in the bay." Hale didn't think. He turned toward the ordnance crew, but Lena was already moving. She crossed the deck in a straight line, no hesitation, no glance at anyone for permission. She ducked into the Seahawk's side bay as the crew chief tried to hold the rack steady. Inside, the drum, almost a meter across, several 100 pounds of high-caliber rounds, was rolling slowly toward the open edge. The helicopter's tilt meant if it rolled out, it would hit the deck and risked detonation from impact. She slid low, bracing her back against the interior frame, catching the drum with her boots first, then hooking her arm around the chock lever. The crew chief shouted for her to get clear, but she ignored it, locking the chock into place with a sharp twist. The metal rang, the drum stopped moving, and she yanked the locking pin through before letting go. Hale was at the hatch when she emerged, sweat streaking the side of her face under the cranial helmet. "You just took a calculated risk," he said. "You calculated right." "I did my job," she replied, stepping past him toward the tie-down crew. But the danger wasn't over. The shift in the helo's cargo had thrown balance off enough that the starboard skid was now digging into the deck's anti-skid surface. The pilot throttled to lift, but the strain groaned through the frame. If they pushed power wrong, they could rip a mount or tip the bird entirely. Hale barked into his radio, "All clear zones around LZ-1. Clear it now." Lena didn't wait to be told. She jogged to the nearest signalman, motioned a pullback, then moved to the skid's contact point, checking for any damage that could lock it in place. With her hand signals relayed through the landing crew, the pilot adjusted just enough to free the skid, lifting clean into the hover before pulling away toward maintenance. The deck crew began breathing again. Hale stepped in front of Lena as she turned back toward her ammo cart. "That's twice in one day you've been in the wrong place at the right time," he said. "You sure you're just a loader?" "I'm sure I'm doing my job," she said, voice even. "Jobs don't usually come with instincts like that," he replied, but didn't press further. By the time evening cycle began, word of what had happened was all over the deck. Westin told it twice in the mess before someone else cut in with, "Yeah, and guess who was first inside the Seahawk?" The version spread fast, details getting sharper with each telling until everyone knew about the loader who'd stopped a live drum from rolling over the edge. In the island, Hale reviewed the security footage from the Seahawk Bay. He watched Lena's approach frame by frame, her trajectory, her low slide, the precision of the chock lock. It was the movement of someone who'd done it before, under fire. He leaned back, the grainy image frozen on her, securing the pin, and thought of the after-action report from that mission years ago. He'd read it enough times to know the skill set it described. This wasn't random. He sent a message to his XO, "Get me Ward's full file, all of it." Below decks, Lena stripped off her gear in the crew locker, hung the blue shirt on its hook, and sat on the bench for a moment longer than usual. Her hands were steady, but she could feel the ripples spreading through the ship. Every time she tried to disappear, the world seemed intent on dragging her back into the light. And now the Admiral had eyes on her. She pulled her personal kit from the locker, unzipped the side pocket, and checked the cloth pouch inside. The medal was there, the stitching around the edge worn but strong. She stared at it for a few seconds, then slid it back, zipped the pocket, and shut the locker. On the deck above, Hale was setting the next piece in motion. The request for Ward's dossier moved through channels with a speed that only a flag officer's name could command, but even with priority tags, the digital folder that landed on Hale's screen looked like a blackout poem. Names smudged into grey bars, dates chopped into ranges, citations summarized in language so careful it said almost nothing. He scrolled in silence, jaw set, until a single line at the bottom of a supplemental attachment forced him to pause. Reassignment at member request. Duties, shipboard logistics, reason, rehabilitation pathway, confidential. He stared at the words, not because they revealed much, but because they admitted what the rest tried to bury. Someone had decided the best place for a person like Ward was a job that would keep her within the machine but out of sight. He pinged Intel, pulled in the JAG rep, and asked for a timeline cross-check against the operation. His memory refused to soften. The judge advocate gave him a careful answer about jurisdiction and compartmentalization. Intel said the code string on the medal variant matched archived procurement logs for a small batch produced under direct authorization, and that no public award ceremony had ever occurred for those serials. That wasn't news to Hale. He needed one answer the paper couldn't give: whether the person wearing that circle on her arm lived up to what it implied: skill honed under pressure, judgment when seconds mattered, and a reason for silence that wasn't vanity. Below, the ship breathed through its cycles. Ward stripped tasks down to their essence and executed cleanly, moving freight from elevator to aircraft with a precision that read as instinct. She avoided gossip without looking aloof, acknowledged instructions with a simple nod, and kept conversations short enough to be polite but closed. Westin watched from a distance, not out of hero worship, but because he wanted to understand how she made decisions. He replayed the Seahawk moment in his head and realized she had not moved like a gambler. She had read angles, mass, slope, and time, and chosen the one action that solved everything at once. That kind of thinking didn't come from luck. In the mess, the story of the loose drum had already mutated into something with dramatic pauses and exaggerated hand motions. Ward stayed out of those retellings. After chow, she walked the long passage that ran beneath the island. A corridor most people used as a shortcut, and she used as a place to let her pulse even out. There was a small brass sign near a junction that most ignored. She stopped under it and leaned her shoulder against a cool frame for 2 breaths, eyes open, mind quiet. Then she kept moving. If anyone saw her, they would have called it a pause. For her, it was a reset, remove noise, set the next decision. Hale left the ops deck and took a walk without calling it that, drifting along the rails above the flight line like a man inspecting weather, which, in a way, he was. He saw confidence in the hands of his crew, but also static in their eyes, the buzz produced when a rumor enters a closed system. Morale on a carrier lives in the space between myth and routine. Stories that survive are the ones that feel true. He could not let the wrong story harden. He pulled the air boss aside and laid out a controlled evaluation plan masked as a safety emphasis. Tighten deck choreography, audit tie-downs, run a fast draw drill on spill containment. Nothing about the schedule mentioned Ward. He didn't have to write her name to put her in the path of proof. He returned to CIC and signed off on a late-day maintenance window. The island's glass hummed with reflected sun, and the ship cut white seams through the water. When the audit started, Ward didn't notice she was being measured. The safety petty officer called out steps, the deck crew responded in sequence, and the line flowed. Hale stood off to the side, arms folded, expression unreadable, asking nothing and seeing everything. Ward checked a lanyard and caught a frayed edge hidden by a clip, swapped it without announcement, and logged it without fuss. She traced a fuel hose route with her eyes and pointed to a potential snag point on a ladder edge that wasn't in the manual. She didn't lecture, she adjusted the angle herself, taped a warning flag and moved on. When the petty officer asked for volunteer leads on a simulated spill, she didn't step forward, but when the clock started, she was already moving kits to the right corners, not to grandstand, but to shorten response paths. Westin filled gaps she created. He didn't realize she'd placed him on the flank that would need the fastest reach if anything jumped off for real. Hale had seen operators fake competence by moving fast and talking loud. Ward's tempo was the opposite. Set the table before anyone knew a meal was coming. He caught the JAG rep's eye through a bulkhead window and got a tiny nod. The lawyer wasn't approving anything. Lawyers never approved. But he understood what Hale was trying. The intel officer messaged a single line to Hale's handheld procurement serial. On the metal variant, confirms operator-only batch, recipients closed file. Hale typed back one word, noted. After the drill, the petty officer dismissed the crew. Ward lingered to coil a hose cleanly. Hale took that moment. "Walk with me," he said, and kept his pace slow enough that she could decide to match it or not. She did. He didn't begin with accusations or praise. He started with a geographic nothing. "You ever been in a storm where the sea looks flat until it lurches?" She didn't answer. He didn't wait. "That's what today feels like." He turned them along the narrow upper walkway where the wind could steal words if you didn't send them right. "Legal won't let me ask you about things I can't know. Intel can't tell me things they're not permitted to see. But this ship is my responsibility. And that includes the human variables. You already know I'm going to keep putting you where your decisions matter. You can be angry about that later. Right now, I want to understand something I can ask." He stopped and looked out past the bow. "When you made your choice in that bay, what did you evaluate first?" She answered without turning. Which action turned 3 problems into 0? He considered that. "And how did you pick it?" "By removing choices that created new risks." "Why did you move yourself instead of ordering the crew chief?" "Distance and angle." She didn't explain further. He didn't need her to. The math of it sat between them. He nodded once. "You have any conditions I should know that affect duty?" "No." "Any debt I should worry about?" "No." "Anyone on this ship who could be leveraged to make you do a stupid thing?" "No." He exhaled through his nose. "All right." He almost said thank you, stopped himself, and changed angles. "You requested this billet." She didn't confirm or deny. He didn't push. "I'll say this plainly. Hiding is not an option here. Neither is theater. If you're going to be on my deck, you're going to be used where you make the ship better." She finally faced him. "I'm here to carry my weight." "Good," he said, "because the ocean doesn't care about our backstories." That night, the ship settled into its nocturnal rhythm. Less noise on the deck, more. In the machinery spaces where crews turned wrenches and ticked through checklists, Hale met with department heads and tailored tomorrow's sequence to factor. In weather, ordnance flow, and training gaps revealed by the audit. No one said Ward's name. They didn't have to. It was under the words. When the meeting broke, Hale remained alone with the hum of electronics. He pulled the velvet box from his pocket and set it on the table, not as a trophy, but as a question. He remembered the day years ago when a man he trusted had slid a similar box across a desk and called it closure. It had not been closure, it had been a lid on a boiling pot. If Ward represented steam finding its way out, he needed to decide whether to lift the lid slowly or let it blow on its own. Ward lay in her rack and stared at the underside of the bunk above. Sleep didn't come quickly, but she didn't chase it. She counted her breaths down to quiet the parts of her mind that still, scanned rooms for exits and catalogued sounds without her permission. The ship's rhythms helped, a low thrum like a giant animal's steady heart, a faint tremor that said forward motion continued, a periodic shiver when stabilizers corrected for swell. She didn't replay the day, she sent it away. What remained was a simple equation. Do the task in front of you with clarity and leave no mess for the next person. In places where stories ended loudly, she had learned that survival favored those who made fewer ripples. But here, her lack of ripples had drawn attention. She accepted that the days ahead would force choices she had avoided making since. The paperwork that changed her name on a roster and erased a code from her sleeve. She closed her eyes and didn't dream. Dawn returned with a pale stripe along the horizon. On a carrier, morning light doesn't creep, it switches the world back on. The green shirts moved gear. Brown shirts ran their pre-flight rituals. Yellow shirts aligned. Aircraft with gestures that looked like choreography but were survival in motion. Ward joined the ordnance detail and took her segment without commentary. She carried weight like it belonged to her. Westin approached with a clipboard, asked one procedural question with the careful tone of someone speaking to an instructor who wasn't officially an instructor. She gave him the exact answer he needed and one sentence of context that would let him make a better choice the next time he hit a similar fork. He walked away feeling like he'd discovered something himself. That was deliberate on her part. Good crews learn by owning outcomes, not by being fed memorized lines. Up on the island, Hale monitored weather. Cells shifting on radar, wind vectors sliding a few degrees off prediction. He tweaked the cycle again. The plan looked like routine, which was the point. He didn't want anyone tense from expecting drama. Tension makes hands stupid. He cleared the first launch, watched metal birds claw their way forward into free air, and let the quiet satisfaction of a clean sequence take a single breath before setting the next run. In the corner of his screen, a maintenance note blinked amber, towing arm. Scheduled for service had been deferred last cycle due to parts backlog. He flagged it and sent a message to deck control to assign a backup tug for the afternoon moves. Small acts prevent big news. Midday brought a brief lull. Ward used it to check stowage she hadn't been asked to check, not because she didn't trust others, but because redundancy is how ships avoid headlines. She found a tie-down that had been secured correctly, but placed in a way that could fatigue under repetition. Adjusted it, and marked the log with a short line that meant something to the next person reading it. Westin passed again, this time with one more question than he needed. She gave him a look that said, "Keep it to one," and he corrected course without embarrassment. She wasn't a mentor by title. She had no interest in being anyone's legend. Teaching without the label kept her invisible while multiplying competence around her. That too was a calculation. Hale called the XO into his office and opened a conversation he didn't enjoy. "If we were wrong about her," he said without naming Ward, "what failure mode should I plan for?" The XO answered with the calm fatalism of a man who understood systems. "If our read is off, it'll show as hesitation at the wrong moment or improvisation that breaks the pattern. But the more likely risk is the crew misreading our posture and creating a cult around the rumor." Hale nodded. "We don't do cults, we do standards. Then keep treating her like a standard. Use her where she's strong and document why in operational terms, not myths." Hale allowed himself half a smile. "You ever think you should have been a chaplain?" "Only when you talk like this, sir." Afternoon shadows shortened, and with them patience for small mistakes. That's when complacency usually tries to climb aboard. Hale kept the cycle crisp. Ward moved another load and handed off to the next team precisely at the handoff line, because lines matter at sea. She checked the faces around her the way you check a gauge, quickly, precisely, looking for values out of expected range. She spotted one, a new hand running the tow motor, with shoulders too tight and eyes too wide. She stepped near enough to speak without an audience. "Breathe out," she said. "You're pulling heavy, not diffusing a bomb. Don't chase the wheel. Set it, correct small." The kid exhaled, nodded, and immediately ran smoother. Hale watched from 50 yards and didn't intervene. Leading sometimes looks like a sentence dropped in the right ear at the right second. Late in the day, Hale got the ping he'd been waiting for and dreading, a secure message from far above both of their pay grades. It didn't say Ward's name either. It said, in language that said nothing and everything, that certain matters aboard his vessel were acknowledged, that his judgment would be supported, provided he documented every relevant decision as operational necessity, and that no external inquiry would be initiated at this time. He read it twice, then deleted it from the active queue and archived it under a tag only he used. He stood for a long second, then walked back out where sunlight could burn off the stale air that message carried with it. He found Ward on the deck and signaled her over with 2 fingers. "You're reassigned for the next cycle," he said. "Temporary. Safety coordination. You'll be where you can see everything." She didn't argue. She simply asked, "Who's in my old slot?" "Westin," he said. "He'll do fine," she replied. "He'll do fine because you'll be watching the whole line," Hale said, and left her with that. Evening crept in with the kind of calm that makes sailors superstitious. The ship held course, the air softened, and the deck took on that metallic glow it gets when the sun skims low. Ward stood at a vantage where the entire choreography played beneath her. Tractors, crews, aircraft, sliding into place on signals that looked like magic to anyone who didn't know the codes. She didn't think about medals or archives. She mapped contingencies. If that tug stalls there, swing a spare here. If that hose chafes, isolate. That run, if that pilot waves off, clear this lane, stack there, bleed pressure on that capstan. It was like hearing a song and knowing every instrument's part, including where a wrong note would show. She carried those maps without writing them down. Hale watched from the island and felt a tension inside him he hadn't admitted loosen a notch. He would not call what he felt trust. He would call it alignment. The ship's needs and this sailor's behaviors intersected. As the last movements of the cycle began, a petty officer on the far side of the deck signaled a minor corrective tow that should have been uneventful. The backup tug's operator misjudged a radius by inches. It didn't cause a crash. It didn't even scrape paint, but it created a near miss that rippled through 5 other motions and forced 3 crews to pause out of sequence. Nothing broke, no one was hurt, but in those 5 seconds, Ward saw a pattern she didn't like, and Hale saw her see it. She lifted a hand, pointed with 2 fingers, and the petty officer in charge read it. Instantly, pause that move, clear a lane, reset the order, run the alternate plan. The deck flowed back into coherence like a river finding its banks again. Hale marked the time, marked the people, marked the decision. He didn't congratulate anyone, he signed the log. When darkness finally took the sky, the ship's lighting shifted to the low tones that keep night vision intact. Ward walked the long passage again, not to think, but to drain whatever adrenaline remained. She passed the small brass sign and didn't stop this time. She didn't need the reset, the day had ended in balance. She returned to her rack and sat for a minute with her feet on the floor, hands resting. On her knees, letting the last of the deck's vibration fade from her bones. Somewhere above, Hale closed his hand around the velvet box, then set it back down, and reached instead for the operations schedule for morning. He penciled in one change that would look like a weather adjustment to anyone reading it. To him, it was something else, a subtle relocation of pressure points, a way to position his people so that if the sea decided to throw a fit, or if luck did, they would absorb the hit without shattering. Morning drills began before the horizon fully cleared, the deck a blur of motion that seemed chaotic to the untrained but was in fact a sequence locked to rhythm and code. Ward was already on the safety coordination post Hale had assigned her, standing where she could watch. The interplay between tractor units, wing walkers, and load crews without being in anyone's way. Her eyes moved constantly, not in a nervous sweep, but in measured arcs, registering. distances, hand signals, and the alignment of moving machines on steel. She didn't speak unless it was to correct something immediately dangerous, and when she did, the correction came in a short, plain sentence aimed directly at the person who needed it. No drama, no audience. Hale watched from the island. He wasn't just checking on her, he was watching the ripple effect. Where she stood, the crew closest to her carried themselves sharper, adjusted to feedback faster. He knew better than to attribute that to mystique. It was simply that she spoke rarely, so when she did, they acted. He filed that observation alongside others, her ability to assess chain reactions before they unfolded, her reluctance to take credit, the way she seemed to avoid eye contact longer than necessary yet never missed a cue in her periphery. Late morning brought a sudden deviation, a last-minute change in aircraft lineup after a maintenance delay pushed one Hornet off schedule and pulled another forward. The swap forced the ordnance load team to reverse their sequence mid-flow. Hale didn't call it a test, but he didn't have to. It was one. Ward tracked the pivot instantly, redirecting a tie-down team to clear the lane before the jet moved forward. She didn't raise her voice, didn't wave her arms. She pointed once, spoke to the lead, and stepped out of the way. The lane cleared before the tow reached it, and the jet slid into position without bumping the next timed movement. Weston was part of the load team that had to adjust, and later, during a break, he passed her in the narrow shade near the island. "That switch could have gone ugly," he said. She didn't look at him when she answered, only if someone froze. He hesitated, then asked, "How do you know where to clear first?" She kept her tone flat, because that was the thing that would stop everything else. Then she walked away. Midday heat pressed down on the deck, the sun flattening shadows until there was nowhere to hide from it. Hale stepped out into it anyway, making a point to be visible where the crew could see their CO take the same conditions they worked in. He moved along the catwalk and spoke briefly with the air boss about timing on the next launch. In the middle of that conversation, the comm in his ear clicked alive, a report from below decks. One of the weapons elevators had paused between decks with a partial load aboard, not a full breakdown, but enough to slow the ordnance cycle, if not cleared quickly. He signaled the air boss to hold, keyed his mic. "Find out who's nearest with clearance to access the shaft space." The reply came back with a name he already expected, Ward. She was on scene within a minute. Helmet visor down, voice calm over the radio as she relayed the position of the elevator car. She didn't guess at causes. She confirmed each safety interlock was engaged. Then directed the mechanical techs to release the jam on the guide rail. It took 6 minutes, but when the elevator resumed travel, it did so under control, with no load shift and no delay to the next flight's prep. From the island, Hale noted the time and outcome, then turned to the air boss. That's the third time she's been at the choke point before anyone else. The air boss didn't answer directly. She doesn't seem to get in the way. Hale left it there. By late afternoon, the tempo increased again. One by one, jets roared off the bow, their afterburners flattening the air and rattling bolts in the railings. On the deck, timing narrowed to seconds. Ward held her station, scanning for anything that could force a pause. She caught it in the corner of her eye. A signal flag tied to a hose line was flapping harder than it should in the slipstream from an idling engine. That could mean a loose fitting, and a loose fitting meant the chance of a spill exactly where no one wanted one. She cut across the lane, crouched, checked the connection, and tightened it before the signalman even turned to look. By the time she straightened, the next move in the sequence was already in motion. Hale saw the correction and made a note he didn't intend to share. It wasn't just that she'd fixed it, it was that she'd done it without breaking flow, without creating a ripple that would make the crew tense. That was harder to teach than any technical skill. The last launch of the day approached, the sun dragging low across the sea and throwing glare off the deck plates. A Hornet was in position at the catapult when an alert came over the net. Minor. Hydraulic fluctuation in the tow tractor that had just cleared the lane. It wasn't in the Hornet's path, but the tractor was stopped at an angle that pinched space for the next tow. The obvious fix was to move it fast. The better fix was to move it without bumping the next two steps in sequence. Ward stepped toward the tractor, waved the operator to hold, then gestured for a second tug. To hook in from the opposite side and pull the machine straight before moving it forward. It took an extra 30 seconds, but the rest of the launch cycle stayed on time. When the final aircraft cleared the deck, the crew exhaled collectively. Hale stayed on the island until the last tie-down was secured, then came down the ladder and crossed to where Ward was checking her log sheet. "Good work," he said. She didn't respond with thanks, she simply said, "Deck stayed clean." He gave her a short nod and walked on. That night, the ship settled into its hum again. In his cabin, Hale reviewed the day's operational notes. Each incident on its own was small: an adjusted tow, a tightened fitting, an elevator restart. But together they painted a picture of someone who consistently stood where she could prevent problems before they became headlines. He closed the file and leaned back, the weight of the velvet box in his pocket, reminding him that some stories start quietly, but none stay that way forever. The next morning opened under a heavy sky, clouds layered low but not yet breaking. The forecast called for deteriorating visibility by mid-afternoon, and Hale adjusted. The flight cycle to front-load launches before the weather could choke the deck. The change compressed every movement into tighter intervals, leaving little room for error. Ward took her post on safety coordination without being told, scanning the lanes as crews hustled to meet the new tempo. The first launch block went clean. Aircraft moved out, tow tractors cleared on time, and ordnance handoffs landed exactly on the tick. But between the second and third launches, a warning flag appeared in the form of a maintenance call. One of the auxiliary power units on a forward-positioned Hornet was showing intermittent output. It wasn't a hard abort, but it demanded attention before launch. The fix meant holding the jet on the catapult while a tech crew ran diagnostics. That stall threatened to back up the entire queue. Ward saw it developing before the deck boss called it out. She moved toward the hold point, positioned herself at the margin where the stalled jet and the incoming tow lane met, and flagged the lead tractor to slow its approach. That small adjustment created a breathing space for the tech team to work without pressure from the next aircraft in line. She then redirected a refuel team to use the delay window to top off a neighboring jet that would have otherwise waited until later in the cycle. By the time the Apu check cleared, the deck had absorbed the delay without losing rhythm. From the island, Hale marked the sequence. It was the kind of mid-game decision that didn't show in a logbook but mattered to the overall score. The weather front arrived faster than predicted. Wind shifted sharply off the bow, visibility dipped, and a fine mist began to slick the deck's surface. Crews adjusted footwear, signals grew sharper to cut through the haze. Hale had already cut the later cycle, leaving only a narrow window to recover. The current sorties and secure the deck before the weather shut them in. Recovery operations began, with 3 Hornets returning in quick succession. The first 2 trapped without issue, but the third caught a slightly late wire, stopping harder than usual. It rolled clear, but the cable recoil spat a fine spray of hydraulic fluid onto the deck near the foul line. In good weather, It would be an easy cleanup between cycles. In deteriorating conditions, it was a hazard that could throw the next landing off by a few seconds, enough to matter. Ward didn't wait for the order. She grabbed a cleanup kit from the ready station, handed a secondary to a deckhand, and split the job. She covered the main slick while the deckhand worked the overspray. The line was clear again before the next inbound signaled the groove. Hale's eyes tracked her from the island. Every time conditions tightened, she stepped into the seam and closed it. Not loudly, not with flourish, just enough to keep the machine turning. By the time the last aircraft was secured, rain was tapping a steady rhythm on the deck plates. Hale called the day's operations early, citing safety, and ordered all non-essential movement below. Ward returned gear to storage and began a slow walk back along the emptying lanes, scanning for anything left unsecured. She found a loose tie on a hose drum and fixed it without mentioning it. Below deck, the mess was louder than usual, crew burning off the day's compressed adrenaline. Weston dropped into a seat across from her with a tray in hand. "They say you've got radar in your head," he said, half a joke, half a question. She didn't look up from her plate. "They're wrong. I just keep my eyes open." He grinned. "That's what radar is." She didn't reply. Up in his cabin, Hale went through the daily reports. The pattern was clear: small actions with large effects, decisions that preempted problems before they grew teeth. He closed the folder and set it aside, reaching instead for the secured comm line. When the voice on the other end answered, he kept it short. "She's exactly what the medal says she is." The pause before the reply was long enough to confirm the other party understood. "Then you know what that means," the voice said. "I do," Hale answered and ended the call. The storm held the carrier in its grip through the night, the sea thudding against the hull in slow, heavy pulses. By morning, the worst of the rain had passed, but the deck was still slick, and a crosswind angled across the bow hard enough to tug at every loose flap of fabric. Hale's orders were to resume operations with caution, reduced launch tempo, stricter clearance on every move. He wanted precision more than speed. Ward stepped onto the deck with the first rotation of crew. Her post remained safety coordination, but today she carried a comm headset to feed direct to the deck boss. Hale wanted her perspective in the loop without filters. The first test came quickly. A tow tractor moving a loaded Hornet across the wind line began to drift a few inches wide. She called it in before it crossed the margin, the correction handled with a single steering input instead of a scramble. Through the morning, her voice cut into the net only when necessary. Short, stripped of anything but instruction. Hold 2 seconds. Shift 1 lane starboard, clear forward by 3 meters. Each call shaved risk without disrupting timing. Hale, listening from the island, found the balance telling she knew when to act and when to let the crew solve their own problems. Midday, the wind gusted harder, catching a fuel cart mid-turn and pushing its rear wheel toward the edge of its marked lane. Ward closed the distance in 4 quick strides, braced against the push, and guided the operator back into line. No radio call, no announcement. By the time most eyes registered the drift, it was already corrected. Hale saw it from above. He'd learned that the most valuable people on a deck like this weren't the ones who reacted fastest to alarms, but those who prevented the alarm from sounding at all. By the last recovery cycle, the sky had cleared to a hard, cold blue. The deck dried in patches, wind steady but manageable. A final pair of Hornets trapped in clean sequence, their arresting cables snapping back into place with the precise violence of a well-tuned machine. Hale gave the order to secure for the day, then descended from the island. He found Ward near the aft elevator, checking lashings on a pallet of ordnance scheduled for below-deck transfer. "Walk with me," he said. She didn't answer, just matched his pace as he led toward the quieter starboard side catwalk. The wind here was cleaner, the noise from the deck muted by distance. "I got the rest of your file," Hale said without preamble. "Not the official one. There's nothing there but ink and black bars, the one that's kept off the system." He didn't look at her, eyes on the horizon line. "I know where that medal came from. I know what happened on that mission." Her step didn't falter. "Then you know why I don't talk about it." "I do, but I also know the people who signed off on putting you here didn't expect you to stay invisible forever." She turned her head just enough to meet his gaze. "I'm not here to be found." He stopped at the rail, resting his hands on the cold metal. "You've been found. The question now is what you want to do with it." Silence hung between them, filled by the hiss of wind along the catwalk. She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was flat. "I want to keep the ship running. That's it." "That's part of it," he said. "The other part is whether you're willing to take responsibility when the pressure spikes beyond what the manuals cover. Because that's where I'm going to put you." She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. "Understood." "Good," he said, "because tomorrow you'll be running the deck drill." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Safety or operations?" "Both," Hale replied. "I want to see how you manage the entire sequence." She didn't ask why, she just said, "What time?" 08. The next day broke clear, but with a forecast for shifting winds by midday, enough uncertainty to make the drill realistic. The crew assembled on deck, the brief, concise, full launch and recovery simulation. No live ordnance, focus on coordination under changing conditions. Ward took position at the deck boss station, comms tight to her ear, eyes already mapping movements before they began. From the first tow, her voice set the tone, calm, clipped instructions, anticipatory adjustments that kept timing smooth. When the simulated malfunction of a tractor was introduced, she rerouted the next. Aircraft with a minimum of delay, using hand signals as naturally as speech. Hale watched from the island, noting how crews responded, not with hesitation but with immediate execution. Mid-drill, a gust front arrived early, forcing a crosswind shift. Ward adapted without visible strain, adjusting taxi paths and repositioning refuel crews to shelter points between movements. She cut unnecessary chatter from the net, giving the deck a clarity that even the air boss admitted later he hadn't expected from someone outside his core team. The drill ended on schedule, the deck secured with every marker in place. Hale came down to the boss station as crews dispersed. "Clean work," he said. She gave a short nod, already stepping aside for the regular deck boss to resume control. That evening, Hale filed the drill report with a single line in the remarks, capable of full deck coordination under variable conditions. Recommend integration into high-pressure cycles. It was as much for the record as for anyone above him who might read it. Ward, back in her berth, didn't see the report. She lay on her rack, eyes on the dim outline of the overhead, the medal still in its pouch in her locker. She had no illusions about what Hale's next move would be. He wasn't a man who collected capable people just to leave them where they were. And she knew that, whatever came next, the days of being just another loader were over. 2 days after the drill, the carrier moved under clear skies and a steady swell, the kind of day that let an air wing find its full stride. The rhythm of launches and recoveries settled into the kind of predictable pattern that hides 1,000 small corrections. Hale had reassigned Ward again, pulling her off the vantage of the safety coordination post and pushing her into rotational duty, embedded with different units each cycle, stripped of the bird's eye perspective she preferred. It wasn't her technical competence he wanted to examine now, that was already proven. It was her adaptability in situations where she couldn't see the whole board, where her decisions had to come from incomplete views. Her morning began with the recovery team, staged at the portside foul line to clear the landing area after each trap. The work was physical and relentlessly precise. Every second between an aircraft's arrest and the next landing mattered. Too slow and you clogged the approach, too fast and you risked leaving debris or hazards in the path. She matched the crew's rhythm within minutes, reading their small nods, hand signals, and unspoken cues. Westin was on the same team for the shift. During a pause between recoveries, he edged closer and asked under the roar of an inbound jet, "You ever think about taking the deck boss chair full-time?" She didn't break her gaze from the trap line. "Not my lane." "Could be," he pressed. "You see things before they happen." She adjusted a line on a chalk and answered without looking at him, "That's what this job is supposed to be." Then the next aircraft hit the wire and conversation ended. Mid-cycle, a call came over the net. Brake trouble on a Hornet about to enter the groove. Emergency protocol surged into place, arresting gear armed, crash crew deployed, medics staged. While others reacted to the specific threat, Ward moved laterally down the foul line, scanning for any unsecured equipment, unlatched panels, or stray personnel that could complicate the recovery. By the time the jet's tailhook snagged the cable and shuddered to a stop, the approach zone was cleaner than it had been all day. The arresting crew did their job, but the risk of secondary hazards had been cut in half without any formal tasking. From the island, Hale watched the sequence unfold and logged it mentally. He'd seen enough to know she wasn't chasing events, she was shaping the ground they happened on. The difference rarely made it into reports, but it was the seam between a near miss and nothing at all. After lunch, she rotated to a forward launch crew. Here the tempo was sharper. Jets moved nose to tail toward the catapults. Tractors reversed out in quick arcs. Yellow shirts snapped signals like semaphore. The launch officer placed her mid-lane where two aircraft would pass within arm's reach. She timed her clearance to slide between them, her presence barely a ripple in the choreography. By mid-afternoon, the light flattened under high clouds, and the wind picked up just enough to start tugging at loose covers and unsecured fabric. Hale's years told him this was the point where complacency could get someone hurt. He kept his eyes on her section, waiting to see if she would pick up on the subtle shift. Then the deck radios flared with a report from CIC. A small vessel, slow, moving and off course, had drifted toward the carrier's operational box. It wasn't a threat, but procedure required adjusting launch flow and holding certain aircraft in place until the contact was identified and cleared. Those kinds of holds were where discipline frayed. Idle engines baked heat into metal. Fuel lines rested under pressure longer than intended. People's attention wandered. Ward didn't wait for the launch officer to bark the usual reminders. She walked the line of parked aircraft, checking every chock and tie. Down, eyes flicking over each intake and panel for anything loose. A refuel line sagging under its own weight got her attention. She signaled the handler to shift position before pressure could drop. By the time CIC cleared the contact, her lane was already primed to roll without hesitation. Hale caught the entire sequence from above. What he noted wasn't just the absence of mistakes, it was the absence of even the conditions for mistakes. She had preempted drift, not the mechanical kind, but the human tendency to slacken when the clock stops. When flight ops wound down, he called her to his cabin. The hatch closed behind her, and he didn't offer a chair. "Your name's moving outside this ship," he said. "Not just through rumor, through channels. People are asking if I'll vouch for you." He studied her face. "I can. The question is if you want me to," she answered without hesitation. "If you do, I get pulled." "That's not why I'm here." "That's not certain," he said, though they both knew the odds. "But the choice isn't entirely yours anymore." "I'm not chasing that choice," she replied. He leaned on the edge of the desk. "Then you should know. If the day comes when the only way through is to put you at the center, I'll do it, no hesitation. And when that happens, there won't be time to weigh whether you want it." She met his eyes. "You already did that." "Not like I will," he said. They stood in a silence thick with understanding. She left without another word, and the latch clicked shut behind her. Hale stared at the spot she'd just occupied, knowing containment was a temporary illusion. On the mess deck later, Westin relayed the vessel contact's story to a knot of crew, painting her checks as instinct bordering on second sight. She ignored the chatter, but she heard it. She'd lived long enough to know how stories mutate when passed from one mouth to another. The details didn't matter. What mattered was that attention was no longer something she could turn off at will. That night, the wind freshened again, carrying the faint scent of a new front building somewhere beyond the radar horizon. The carrier cut through dark water, lights shielded, crew moving through the habits that marked the hours between shifts. In her rack, Ward lay awake, aware that quiet on a warship was never a constant. It was just the breath before something asked for more than anyone wanted to give. The day began without drama, which, on a carrier, always felt like a dare. A high haze muted the sun, the sea lay in long, slow swells, and the air wing. This plan called for a full cycle before weather shifted again in the evening. Hale signed the deck brief with a note to keep movement crisp and chatter. Down, he wanted clean lines, no improvisation for its own sake. Ward reported early, checked each lane for the kind of small vulnerabilities that only turn lethal when timing goes wrong, and took the headset that tied her directly to the deck boss net. No announcement marked the change. She simply appeared where she was needed and watched the patterns tighten. The first launches ran like a well-tuned drill. Tugs traced their arcs, wing walkers guided aircraft with economy. Load crews handed off at the exact marks. A minor pause in a refuel lane threatened to ripple outward, but she trimmed it before it grew teeth, shifting one unit too. Meters pulling slack out of a kinked hose, rolling the sequence back into harmony before the airboss even glanced down. Hale, from the island, noted the correction and moved his attention to weather. A pressure line was stalking the horizon, slow but intentional. He adjusted recovery slots to land the outbound flights before the edge of that line hit. Mid-morning, an alert slid across the ops display. A destroyer escort had relayed a drone track heading toward the group's airspace from a fishing corridor that sometimes doubled as a smuggler's lane. Rules of engagement were clear, procedures practiced, but the timing was poor. The deck was still hot, and any diversion would force a reschedule that would leave aircraft idling on metal while crews worked around a moving target. Hale broke down the problem into pieces: keep the launch stream stable, preserve recovery, windows and position response assets without loading the deck with uncertainty. He told CIC to vector a patrol element to sniff the track while the ship maintained course, then keyed his mic to the deck boss. "Expect a hold on Cat 2 in 10. Keep lanes elastic." Ward heard it the moment he transmitted. Elastic meant ready to bend without breaking. She walked the catapult line, checked stops, confirmed chocks, and spoke to the launch officer in a tone that communicated confidence, not alarm. When the hold hit, she held back the second tow, 3 steps short of its mark. used the pause to swap a crewman showing early signs of tunnel vision, and returned the lane to ready status like a spring-loaded but under control. Nothing about her posture suggested stress. Everything about her sequencing said she anticipated pressure and was already shaping it. CIC's contact resolved into a false lead, a commercial quadrotor rig lashed to a fishing boat's mast, a rigged antenna reading like something it wasn't. Patrol checked, confirmed, waved off. The ship never altered course. Hale logged the interference, exhaled once, and returned to the more prosaic business of moving aircraft and people through a finite space without allowing the wave of a near problem to topple the dominoes. He stole a glance at Ward. She was already somewhere else, forward, aligning a toe against an unexpected gust pattern that had started curling across the bow as the haze thickened. By early afternoon, the sky shifted toward pewter, light, flattening enough to erase shadow cues crews like to use when judging distance. This is where habits mattered most. She altered her scan, relying on known reference points rather than visual contrast, and tightened voice cues on the net. Fewer syllables, exact nouns, zero embroidery. Westin crossed her lane at a jog and paused long enough to get one instruction: stay ahead of the turn, don't ride it. He nodded, corrected his arc, and disappeared back into the flow. A warning lamp flickered to life along the aft weapons elevator panel. The car had moved to the initial position and stopped a fraction off level, enough to threaten a snag if a load rolled through. She reached the hatch, checked the interlocks, and told the mech to cycle the safety pin sequence before any attempt to nudge. It took a minute longer than a brute force shove would have, but when the platform moved, it did. So in perfect alignment, and a pallet of ammunition crossed the threshold without a bump. Seconds matter, so do systems. She chose systems. The second launch of the afternoon brought the first real break. A Seahawk support helo called in a vibration alarm, not catastrophic but unresolved. Flight control slotted it for immediate recovery ahead of a pair of returning Hornets. Hale's voice came soft across the net, clear a corridor. "Keep the deck quiet." She pivoted, cleared excess bodies from the drift path, signaled the crews at the margin to hold positions, and made sure nothing that could roll sat free. The helicopter came in hotter than a standard approach, skids kissing, deck with more force than anyone liked, and rocked hard on settling. Inside, a cargo strap gave way, and a heavy crate slid toward the hatch with a steady, ugly certainty. She didn't wait for a second call. She crossed the threshold in a low drive, braced, blocked the crate's momentum with her shoulder, and kicked the chock lever out so the skid wouldn't skate if the pilot pulled power unevenly. The crew chief grabbed the other side, and together they stopped 300 pounds of bad idea from meeting an edge at speed. The pilot feathered power, steadied, and shut down. She backed out, handed the chief a replacement strap, and keyed the net once, bay secured. No one applauded. No one had time. That was fine with her. Hale watched the whole thing across a dozen degrees of distance and made an adjustment he hadn't planned to make until next week. He radioed the air boss and spoke in plain operational terms. "Ward moves to deck boss Shadow full-time for remainder of cycle. Put her where every lane crosses." It wasn't a ceremony. It wasn't even a promotion. It was alignment formalized. She took the vantage without comment and ran the next hour like an orchestra. Pit conductor who understood both the score and the building's fire exits. Not a single big moment announced itself. Only a chain of small ones that could have grown teeth if neglected. She aimed attention exactly where it needed to go, then took it away before it became a crutch. The crew responded not with awe, but with efficiency, which is the only compliment that matters in a space this unforgiving. Late afternoon, the weather line finally arrived. The first drops hit like static. Then the rain built until it stitched the deck with 1,000 thin needles. Signals turned sharper to beat the opacity. Wheels slipped if a hand got lazy. And the wind began to walk equipment sideways when it could find purchase. Hale called a tempo reduction without shutting down and reassigned recovery slots to land the last birds before conditions went from unpleasant to unworkable. Everyone understood the stakes: finish without incident or spend a night untangling preventable mess. The first inbound of the last pair trapped clean. The second called an issue on final, a minor warning that could be ignored if the pilot was willing to ride it. He made the right choice to call it out. That meant the deck would need extra seconds to absorb variability. She prepped the line, cleared the foul zone, and set the crash crew where they could spring without blocking an exit route. The Hornet came in shallow, hook low, caught late, and stopped in a shorter distance than the book liked. It was safe. It was also a reminder that every number you ever memorized could turn elastic when machines and humans met bad weather. Then a thing happened manuals get right in theory and crews dread in real life. The arresting cable recoiled, hit a deck cleat at an odd angle, and spat metal shards across a narrow segment of steel. Not many, not large, but sharp enough to turn a boot slide into a fall if someone planted wrong. She moved faster than any alert, split the cleanup team into 2 vectors so the path cleared in half the time, and had the area marked before the next motion order came down. No one fell, no one even stumbled. Up above, Hale crossed one item off a mental list he hadn't voiced. Would she keep tempo when the usual problem solved itself into a new one? Answer, yes. With the deck finally secure and aircraft chock tight, he stepped down from the island and walked the long path toward the center line. Rain found its way under his collar. He didn't care. He stopped within earshot and said the only words that mattered: crew, eyes on. Heads turned without anyone making a show of it. He didn't raise his voice. This ship runs on standards, not stories. Today we watched someone uphold those standards in every lane she touched. That's what I expect from all of you. Petty Officer Ward, front. She stepped forward because refusing would have been theater. He continued, steady. Effective immediately, Ward is assigned to deck coordination under my authority. Her instructions carry weight equal to the deck boss when issued in service of safety and flow. You'll treat them as such. We are done with whispers. We are doing work. He didn't mention medals. He didn't need to. He nodded once, and the crew went back to moving the world. Night came in with the rain, a dense grey that made the ship feel smaller while the ocean around it grew endless. In his cabin, Hale opened the secure drawer and set the velvet-lined box on the desk. He stared at it without touching it, then closed it again and slipped it into a side compartment. The symbol mattered less than the pattern he had catalogued over days. Action at. The point of friction, judgment under compression, zero appetite for spectacle. He wrote a short message to a distribution list that would never appear. On any printed roster, Ward integrated into deck coordination. Performance warrants retention. Recommend no extraction at this time. Operational necessity remains highest value. He sent it and accepted what it implied. That the quiet would not last forever, but he had bought the ship another span of days where choices would be made from the deck, not from a room without windows. She did not know about the message. She didn't need to. After a quick shower and a change into dry clothes, she made a slow circuit through passages that smelled of salt and oil and hot metal. She checked in on Weston's section, offered one sentence that would help him shave a second off a line movement tomorrow, and kept walking. At her locker, she unzipped the side pouch and took the medal out just long enough to feel its weight. It was heavier than it looked, not because of the metal, but because of what it bound to her. She slid it back into the cloth, sealed the zipper, and shut the door. Sleep did not arrive immediately. She didn't chase it. She lay still, counted breaths, and let the ship's heartbeat fold over her. When rest came, it came like a switch being thrown, not because peace had been earned, but because the body agreed to stop arguing with the day. At dawn, the storm eased, and a new light polished the steel until it reflected the sky's pale blue. Crews stepped back into roles that never truly stop. She took her place at the crossing of lanes where everything can go wrong and will if attention drifts. People greeted her not with salutes they weren't authorized to give, but with head tilts that acknowledged function. That was exactly how she liked it. Hale stood on the island and let himself experience something close to relief. He had not solved the part of this that lived off his ship in rooms where stories are written about people as if they were pieces on a board. But he had solved the part that mattered today. Who could be trusted with the seconds that decide whether a machine moves cleanly or a life ends faster than a hand can reach? He would fight the other fight when it arrived. For now, his ship moved under a sky that had forgiven the previous day's weather, and his deck contained the person who made it less likely to bleed. Later that morning, a young sailor approached her with a question he had rehearsed. He asked it badly. She answered well, not because she owed him mentorship, but because it cost her nothing to place a brick where a wall needed support. He walked away taller by a half-inch no ruler could measure. The crew around him watched the exchange and read the lesson without anyone spelling it out. Competence is contagious when distributed in plain language. Near noon, the air boss stepped beside her and offered a sentence most people never heard from him. "You run a clean line," he said. She didn't pretend it was nothing. "So do your people," she replied. He grunted, which, in that dialect, translated to approval. The day passed without headlines. The day shone for exactly that reason. She finished her shift with hands that ached just enough to remind her they existed, and a mind that still hummed with maps of movement she could now draw blind. On her way off the deck, she passed Hale heading the other direction. He didn't stop her. He didn't have to. He said one thing as they crossed: "You did right." She answered in the only way that fit the space. So did they. At evening chow, the mess filled with the low roar of 1,000 small conversations. Weston slid onto the bench across from her and tried to recount the Hilo incident as if she hadn't been there. She let him because telling stories is how crews bind themselves into a unit. When he reached the part where he described the crate lurch, his hands mimed the angle with a precision that told her he had learned the underlying geometry. That mattered more than his embellishment. If he could read slope and mass and timing, he would one day do what she had done without needing her cue. Afterward, she walked the long lower passage one more time and stopped under the small brass sign she'd used as a mental hinge in the early days aboard. She leaned her shoulder against the cool frame, took 2 measured breaths and moved on. It was no longer a reset. It was a ritual acknowledging a before and an after. The ship pressed on through water that had resumed its long exhale. The horizon burned a thin copper line before the sun slid under it, and the carrier's lights came up in a pattern that looked to distant eyes like a city floating in the dark. Inside that city, men and women laid out tools, checked lists, laced boots, and prepared for the next set of demands. No one announced that a chapter had turned. On ships like this, turning pages is done in silence and confirmed by work. Hale wrote one final note before lights out. Keep her on the crossing. Train the line to her standard. Don't let myth eat the truth. He shut the notebook and listened to the ship the way a farmer listens to wind in his fields. He could hear where the stress lived. He could hear where it was easing. He could hear, beneath it all, the steadiness of motion earned through 1,000 quiet choices. She lay in her rack and watched sleep approach like a wave that would take her whether she welcomed it or not. She thought of nothing she would say if asked to explain what the day had meant. She would not package it. She would not sell it. She would return to the deck in the morning and do the next necessary thing. A medal remained hidden because the point was not the symbol but the work. A commander stood ready to spend her skill. When the math demanded it, a crew, piece by piece, took on a sharper edge because someone set a pattern worth copying. The ocean doesn't applaud. It asks if you will answer again. She would. Out here, there are no headlines, no parades, only the steel beneath your boots and the trust you earn in the seconds that matter. She didn't ask for recognition, and the deck didn't give it. What it gave was something better, the quiet knowledge that when the moment came, she held the line. This is Veteran Biker, where true stories ride on grit, not glory. If you've stood your ground in your own storm, tell us in the comments. Like, subscribe, and join us for the next mission. The ocean's never done asking the question. We'll be here to answer.